Adrian Wojnarowski.
Adrian Wojnarowski.
Adrian Wojnarowski announced his retirement.
He literally changed the game.
He's the best in the business.
Best to ever do it.
He did so many things for so many people with nothing in return.
Nobody's more respected.
Ruthlessly excellent.
Singular obsessiveness it takes.
I've talked to too many people at ESPN who were afraid of falling on the wrong side of Woj.
He would say, I have X number million followers on social media. You need to provide me information or it's not going to go well for you on my platform. He used it as a tool, as a threat.
2010, the NBA fined Joe Dumars $500,000 for leaking multiple confidential league memos to Wojnarowski.
Adrian Wojnarowski. What comes to mind when you hear that name, see that face? Twitter, ESPN, the sensational, fantastic Woj bomb. Of course, that's a dumb question. For millions of NBA fans growing up in the digital age, Woj embodied these platforms. From the most casual of fans, to NBA players, to literal NBA owners, Wojnarowski had everyone's attention. Before his retirement, Woj was probably the second or third most known name in NBA media, behind Inside on NBA and Stephen A. Smith. He's amassed a gargantuan social media following, with 6.5 million people following him to see what he had to say. Put him ahead of any media figure that's not named Shaq. How did he get here? I mean, when you think about the media of today's age, you think questions, or documentaries, or hot takes. That's media, right? But what did Woj do? He put out news faster than anyone else on planet Earth could, by a margin of anywhere from a few hours to a matter of seconds. And this isn't stuff that you wouldn't be able to hear anywhere else. No, we're talking about trades, contract signings, a draft, literal minutes before the commissioner announced the pick. It gets to a point where you think, really? But then, of course, you remember the pure rush that comes from a pure Woj bomb. I still remember where I was sitting when Kevin Durant announced that he was going to the Warriors. I was on my $100 PC editing a YouTube video. I was in a Kroger's bathroom in Euless, Texas, when it was announced that LeBron was going to LA. My first night on Twitter was in a hotel room in Columbus, Ohio. And I remember when Timothy Mozgov got his 4-year, $64 million deal. These are core memories, right? Now ask me, where did I get the info from? ESPN, TNT, Bleacher Report? No, it was Woj, man. Come on. The Woj bomb. There's just something so exhilarating being a part of the NBA's lifeblood, a feeling that I think all of the NBA fandom inherently wants to chase. And we were able to do so through Woj's tweets. Okay, but still, how? You can't really call this journalism. I mean, this didn't even exist 15 years ago.
There was not a job called NBA Newsbreaker.
This is Howard Beck, one of the most prolific NBA journalists for the last 27 years, who's written about and gotten to know the biggest NBA names. He's seen a few changes over the years.
The job of a national NBA writer for most newspapers back in like the 80s and 90s and early 2000s was to do a combination of reporting and analysis, maybe some exclusive interviews. But the role of the national NBA reporter back then was not to be breaking news on every team in every city and every last assistant coach hire. That just didn't exist.
This phenomenon of inside reports is a new thing, yet it dominates the landscape of NBA media, to the point where you have parody accounts who are more famous than 90% of journalists.
Chris Paul was making fun of James' man boobs in practice to the point that he broke down in tears and had to leave a couple of practices. Okay, that's what.
By the way, Central, if you see this video, bro, tap in with me, man. We gotta work. The reason Wojnarowski was so popular is because he's the godfather of Twitter reporting. And once he started, he never looked back. For better or for worse. Let's take a brief look back at the history of NBA media. We're going way back to the early days of the league. Now, for a long while in America, basketball was a third-rate sport. And the NBA at some points was struggling to stay afloat. Baseball reigned supreme, and back in the day, so did newspaper and radio. Then TV, which the NBA famously lagged behind on, hence the infamous final games placed on tape delay. It's partially why Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game is all over the newspaper, all on the radio, but never recorded. If you want to hear the full story on that, by the way, subscribe. A video on that is on the way, trust. Due to this lack of popularity, the NBA had to do anything to get its name out there. So that meant letting journalists in, anywhere and everywhere. This is Pete Croatto, author of Hang Time to Prime Time, a deep dive into the surge of NBA's popularity from the 70s and 80s.
If you talk to any NBA reporters who came of age in the 70s and the 80s, the NBA was all about providing access and providing opportunities for journalists to talk to just about anybody. Like David Stern was somebody that you could, if you were at a newspaper and you wanted to talk to the commissioner, you could talk to the commissioner. Journalists traveled with the teams. That was a regular thing. They were on the team bus, they were on the team plane. He would check into the same hotel with the team, and the traveling secretary would give the beat writers a list of the players and their room numbers and their phone numbers. I mean, that's how it was back then.
Then Magic and Bird happened. Then Jordan. Then the Dream Team. Because of this,
the NBA became more corporate. It became a giant business. And that's good because, again, more people know about the NBA. It expands to more markets. It expands globally. But if you're a reporter, it became harder to develop one-on-one relationships because there's just too many people.
There are just a lot more people managing the players. They may have a personal PR person. There was a team PR person. They may have their own brand manager and other people who are in their ear about what they should and shouldn't do. Some teams have gotten to be extremely controlling about when a player can talk or whether they have to have a PR person standing next to them or any number of other obstacles that teams have thrown up.
The ease of access back then was mind-boggling.
Eventually, TV personalities and highlight tapes dominated the media space. Look at SportsCenter with Rich Eisen and Stuart Scott, and Inside the NBA with Ernie Johnson and Kenny the Jet Smith. Sports Illustrated and Slam became two of the biggest magazines in the country, and NBA fans were given a glimpse into the lives and luxuries of their favorite players. Later on, hot take pundits became popularized with Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, and the NBA became the home of debate. When the internet came around, it was an extension of everything that had come before it. The hot takes, the speculation, and the news. Then Twitter came along. What started with the league's best players just saying what's up on the app turned into a behemoth. Adrian Wojnarowski, at this point a columnist at Yahoo Sports for 2 years, and one of the nation's best, had built a reputation for news breaking and writing flavorful pieces that mirrored the intensity of on-screen personalities. It was going great. But there was a problem.
Greg Oden's rookie year, he was declared out for the season. I found out that the Blazers had told their players that Oden was going to be out, and they had told the team, and I got it confirmed. And I wrote the story, and I sent the story in, and the story got posted. Think of how long that takes. And then I just sat there refreshing Yahoo and refreshing other sites, waiting for someone to see that it was up on our site. And I remember it was like 40 minutes later, maybe AP acknowledged it. But it just shows more what a different era it was. The immediacy, like, is it a story if no one's hitting refresh on Yahoo's site?
This thought remained in Woj's mind until the 2009 NBA draft.
I remember that night, I had not been on Twitter. One of the best people I ever worked with, Johnny Ludden at Yahoo. We were covering the draft, and I said, I have all this information that I can report, but I don't really have, by the time we put it on the site, it's gone. And Johnny's, at the time his girlfriend, now his wife, Jennifer, said, why don't you create a Twitter account?
And the rest is history. That same night, Woj dropped his first bomb. Shaq was getting traded from the Phoenix Suns to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Later that draft, he reported that Golden State was looking to draft Steph Curry since he'd fallen in the draft. Things were looking good. And of course, this was just the beginning. Now, as with basically any and everything you could say about the NBA for the past 15 years, this all started with LeBron James.
I was the beneficiary of timing. 2010, LeBron James. There was a perfect storm of interest in the NBA.
This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. A while back, I decided to give therapy a shot, and I ended up using BetterHelp for a few months. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I found it really useful in helping me work through a few things that I'd been dealing with. I learned about a specific method of journaling, which really helped in dealing with some of the stress that I had been feeling. The process with BetterHelp is straightforward. You fill out a quick questionnaire, and they match you with a licensed therapist, in most cases, within a couple of days. If the first therapist isn't quite right, switching is easy and free. What I liked most about it was how flexible it was. Everything is online, so I didn't have to worry about fitting therapy into my schedule or where I would have to go to meet someone. I had plenty of options for time, and I could attend in the comfort of my own room. If you've been considering therapy, BetterHelp could be a great place to start. Use my link, betterhelp.com/KipKame, to get 10% off your first month. They've got a network of over 30,000 therapists, so there's a great chance that you'll find the one who's right for you. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video, and for making therapy more accessible. Now, let's get back to sports media. The Decision, where LeBron birthed the villain, the super team, and the modern day NBA media landscape. The game started to be less about what was on the court and more about what was off of it. LeBron's decision was the biggest news in sports, maybe America, in the summer of 2010. And in this new landscape, Adrian Wojnarowski had begun to cement his forte, getting the scoop first. He'd already realized that this was going to be his niche in the NBA world, being the NBA newsbreaker. He'd already made his mark as being one of the league's best at breaking news. Every time a new signing or any other event happened in the NBA, Woj was the one to report it. Now, of course, NBA reporters, like all journalists, want to get the scoop first. But since Twitter came out, things felt different. After all, in Woj's words,
it kind of became a scoreboard of what was out there first.
At this time, Woj was busy building up his sources. Since the old school reporters already had dibs with the people in senior positions, Woj worked with the assistant coaches, befriending them and building relationships in exchange for morsels of information that he could report out. After being one of the top columnists for close to a decade, Woj's Rolodex ran deep. He reported with laser accuracy on every player in the league from Nate Robinson to Tracy McGrady. Well, everyone except LeBron Ramon James. James is chasing Warren Buffett and Jay-Z the same way he should be chasing Russell and Jordan and Bryant. He wants CEOs to bow before him, engage him as though he is a contemporary on the front lines of industry. Only, the truth of the matter is, he's a singular talent who's going to watch his playoff failures start to chip away at the thing that seems to matter to him most, his marketability and magnetism. This is so cap. Everything has come too easy to him, and he still doesn't believe that winning championships takes a consuming, obsessive desire that borders on the maniacal. He is chasing high school and college kids on recruiting trips for his fledgling marketing company, medicating his insecurities with unending and unfolding free agent dramas. Stop strutting, stop preening, stop stomping away as an ungracious winner, a sore loser, and win something, LeBron. For all of James's unselfishness on the floor, he can still be so selfish off it. They could have lined up the greatest players in the game's history Tuesday night, in the primes of their championship lives, and there isn't one of them who would have deflected and deferred like the self-proclaimed King James. Damn. This is but a taste of what Adrian Wojnarowski had to say about LeBron. Other highlights include, he sounds like an immature, self-absorbed brat, the self-proclaimed king, and now everyone gets a front row primetime seat for how it means to live without self-awareness, without restraint. This is real hate. The vacuous star for our vacuous times. Boy, is you good? There's a whole webpage dedicated to LeBron Woj hate tweets. Check it out in the description. While you're down there, by the way, like and subscribe. Thank you. So yeah, Woj had a hate boner for LeBron. The question is though, why? He'd made a name for himself by writing hard-hitting pieces, and oftentimes rightly criticizing players and front offices alike for their performances. But then there are a few pieces that, didn't fit. Let's take a brief look. Woj wrote a few pieces in the 2009-2010 season about Chris Paul and the Hornets. While he was reporting the correct information, there were a few sentences here and there that, to put it bluntly, were unnecessary glaze. Beyond the charming smile and gentlemanly disposition, Paul has a tenacious will and a terrific temper. Beyond it all, he's downright ferocious. Ugh, that sounded weird. These liberties didn't stop there. That same season, Nate Robinson was playing for the Knicks and they'd benched him for a while. So his agent, Aaron Goodwin, demanded for a trade directly through Woj. As in, sent him an email saying, requested a trade from the Knicks ASAP. That type of thing. And wouldn't you know it, Woj was the first to put out news regarding Chris Paul and Nate Robinson. Surely you can pick up what I'm putting down here. But let's make it clear. To do the type of journalism that Woj did, which is, of course, getting news out a few seconds, few minutes, few hours before everyone else, you have to have someone tell you what the news is. So where do you get it from? According to my NBA sources, you get it from having a relationship with around 80 to 100 people in the NBA. That is, some of the owners, the GMs, maybe assistant GMs, and the top agents. When Woj started out in the NBA, he had few people's trust. He was just a journalist that had covered college hoops. But once he realized what the future of this thing was, he became hellbent. He worked his way up from the assistant coaches and up-and-coming agents, people who eventually, in time, became the main players in the NBA. These would become the sources that made him ubiquitous in the NBA media landscape. And it was a relationship solely because Woj made it one. He'd constantly check up on his sources. Maybe asking about how the dog was, how the children were doing in school. Maybe some fishing, I don't know. They'd talk, and at some point they would give him information because, quote, he earned it. But more importantly, Lawrence Frank, former head coach of the Brooklyn Nets and current president of the Los Angeles Clippers, was one of those coaches that Wojnarowski had a relationship with. And even when he led the Brooklyn Nets to the worst start in NBA history, Woj had nothing but good things to say about Lawrence. I mean, they went 0-13. And somehow, Woj's article about that turned into an inspirational story about how Lawrence Frank was cut from his high school team 4 times and made it sound like a good thing. Quote, they don't deserve this streak on their legacy. Might be true, but wow. And often, Woj would tweet out stuff in defense of Al Frank. As you could imagine, the relationship has been very strong ever since. So now, what happens if you don't give him any info? Whew, boy. Let's take a look into one of the only times Woj couldn't get the story right to save his life. the biggest one of the 21st century. LeBron's decision. 3 days before LeBron's announcement shocked the world, Wojnarowski tried to put a finger on where LeBron was taking his talents to. Cleveland ties still could tie LeBron. That was the name of the article. And it started with Woj detailing how the Cavaliers had to give LeBron a presentation in New York that was, quote, designed as much to steal a 14-year-old away from a traveling baseball team than woo a self-proclaimed disciple of Warren Buffett. Okay, what? So Woj apparently was trying to imply here that LeBron had the maturity of a little leaguer. But there's more. LeBron James and his high school buddies, 25-year-olds trying to play the part of a global corporation, but ultimately reached at a meaningful level with cartoons and locker room humor. Damn, that kind of insulted me. What? You mean once I turn 25, I can't like DBZ anymore? According to one of Woj's sources, it didn't take long to realize that you're dealing with 25-year-old kids. These kids included Maverick Carter, who cut out longtime CAA power broker and current executive of the New York Knicks, William Wesley, completely from LeBron's decision-making process because, according to Woj, Maverick was so scared of Wesley's power that he had to, quote, undermine Wesley's credibility and proclaim his own power. Wow. Woj is signed with CAA, by the way. Just want to put that out there. Another client, Aaron Goodwin, Nate Robinson's agent, is also signed with CAA. And guess what? LeBron fired Goodwin 5 years before this, something that Woj, of course, had to make a comment on. Aaron Goodwin, his old agent, tried to be honest with him and his high school buddies, but it got him fired 5 years ago. The article goes on and ends with, you get the idea that James is an overgrown teenager, getting a few laughs with his buddies, driving home to Akron from this cattle call in Cleveland to watch cartoons, play video games, and kill some time, until he gives the nod to post the big news that maybe the rest of us should have known all along. He's home. Yikes. Of the almost 1,200 words that Woj used in that piece, only 6 involved the Miami Heat. The flashing of Pat Riley's rings. Okay. Now, of course, 3 days later, we all know what happened, and LeBron was promptly roasted alive by every media circuit on earth. But perhaps no one was less scathing than Woj. Inside Look at LeBron's Free Agent Coup was the name of the article. He started out saying basically that LeBron was insufferable as a 19-year-old in the 2004 Olympics, and that, quote, no one could stand James. It then goes into a bunch of more unbased claims, which you can read for yourself in the description, built in with criticism courtesy of contemporary NBA journalist Ethan Strauss, in an article called Outside Look at LeBron's LeBron article. Haha, funny. So for most of this article, Woj was basically clowning on Mav Carter, calling him jealous and calling LeBron a big kid and stuff like that, right? But the line that stood out the most from the 4,000-word article was, those with knowledge of his plans insist he never intended to re-sign with Cleveland. Well, what does that tell us? Let's take a slight reprieve from the NBA world and take a look at the NFL. Go Chiefs! I'm from KC. Adam Schefter is the go-to guy when it comes to breaking news for the National Football League, getting paid around $9 million a year to do it. And, other than Shams, of course, Woj's closest counterpart.
There are few things in life more satisfying than getting a big story. It's like a drug. You become addicted to it.
The drug of breaking news before everyone else has led Schefter into multiple controversies, some unethical and others borderline illegal, all in the name of the scoop. His first transgression came in the year of 2011. Now, it was found out after a federal investigation of Washington Commanders' former owner Dan Snyder that Schefter was sending full, unedited stories to the Commanders' president Bruce Allen and asking him to, quote, please let me know if you see anything that should be added, changed, tweet. Thanks, Mr. Editor, for that and the trust. So, listen, I'm not a professional journalist or anything, right? But I took journalism 101 in college. One of the first things we learned was never let the subject edit the piece. It goes against everything it means to be a journalist. Because at that point, you're not reporting the truth. You're just letting your subjects get their ish off. But I mean, hey, it's part of the breaking game. Remember, Schefter thanked the president for 2 things. 1, for being Mr. Editor, jokingly, but still. And 2, most importantly, for his trust. See, that's the most important part of this whole thing. Trust. If you do something that your subject doesn't like as an insider, you're probably cooked. But if you let them tell their story, even if it's cap, they'll continue to give you access. It reminds me of the Aiden Ross stream with President-elect Trump. Say what you will about either of them, but this was clearly a mutually beneficial transaction. Aiden got access to the former president of the United States, and Donald Trump got exposure to Aiden Ross's impressionable audience. The only thing was, Aiden had to glaze like there was no tomorrow.
So what's your good side? What do you like walking on? What side do you like walking on?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, you look good from both sides. Yeah, it doesn't really matter at all.
Schefter's been caught red-handed for this as well. When Deshaun Watson's case first came out, yeah, we're going heavy-handed here. The jury found out that for one charge, there wasn't enough evidence to indict him. Unfortunately for Deshaun, though, there's about 22 more waiting. Adam Schefter's first reports on the subject were, this is why Deshaun Watson, from the beginning, welcomed a police investigation. He felt he knew that the truth would come out. And today, a grand jury did not charge him on any of the criminal complaints. Huh? He later put out an apology tweet, but come on. He admitted later that he got the news from Deshaun's agent. In so many words, saying he was Deshaun's PR guy. I recommend Set the Edges video for more. Back to the values thing, because this is pretty crazy. A few years back, Minnesota Vikings running back Dalvin Cook was sued for domestic violence by his girlfriend at the time, with serious levels of both proof and of severity. When Schefter reported it first, he didn't acknowledge any claims from the suit at all. In fact, he called Cook the victim. Well, I mean, this was a stupid toxic relationship, so that was actually true as well. But the women's side had to come from another news source. And finally, the most egregious of mistakes that Adam Schefter made in his career was leaking New York Giants Jason Pierre-Paul's medical records without his permission. Pierre-Paul had lost parts of his hand in a fireworks accident, and Schefter, after being leaked the information, put it out to Twitter before Pierre-Paul or the Giants could say anything about it. Pierre-Paul then sued ESPN for sharing the information, which was leaked by a hospital employee who was later fired, as they had broken the HIPAA compliance in sharing the information. ESPN settled out of court, and there was no apology from Schefter. For all of these cases, except the Pierre-Paul, Schefter would say, "I could have done better," and left it at that. This is regarding mistakes that break journalistic and damn near legal code. Didn't get him fired. On the contrary, actually, he's getting 8 figures for breaking news, not for the facts, but to do it first. And if that means sharing leaked documents from hospital employees, passing player statements for facts in criminal trials, or having teams edit your stories, so be it. He gets it done, and is the best of the best at what he does. And hey, real recognizes real.
There are only a handful of people that could understand what you do for a living and what it takes and what goes into it. And Woj was one of those.
So what about Woj? Schefter's been caught red-handed a lot more times than Woj has. After all, it's not like Woj stood up for KPJ during the Kirsi Gondrzic situation. But that doesn't mean that Woj is in the clear. Let's talk about Joe Dumars, one of the main stars of the Bad Boys Pistons. He became an NBA GM and was dominant from 2003 to 2008, making it to the conference finals every year, even winning a championship in 2004. But after they got swept by LeBron in 2009, things changed. For the next 5 years, they reached 30 wins just one time. A terrible look for a team that was once so dominant. It's like the Cavs after LeBron left, like seriously. But Woj had nothing negative to say about the Pistons during that span. In fact, the first article that he wrote acknowledging the team's issues came 3 years in, and his analysis was that they were slowly regenerating. They went on to 2 more sub-31 seasons before Dumars stepped down. What's more, Woj felt the need to cover the various accomplishments of Joe Dumars' life, such as graduating from college in 2008 and relentlessly guarding Michael Jordan back in the day. Or he would make points in other articles of Dumars' authority, like how Allen Iverson was scared of him. Yeah, I mean, sure, it's cool he's getting covered, right? But you gotta ask, is it really necessary? Then you find out that in 2010, Joe Dumars was fined $500,000 for leaking confidential league documents to Woj. Yeah. And of course, as you could imagine, Woj broke every single Piston story up to 2014. See, it was Woj's freedom to both break news and to share his opinion so aggressively that made him so powerful, that enticed top league executives to tank $500,000 fines for his good graces.
And apparently get hired by the NBA in executive positions afterwards. Hey, if they get me, y'all, just know what happened to me.
And this was in 2010. By the time he had made it to ESPN, Woj had grown so powerful that he was basically the LeBron of NBA journalism. And like LeBron, when he joined ESPN, he could choose his roster. See, back while he was at Yahoo, Woj only had one enemy in mind: ESPN. Funnily enough, he grew up in Bristol, Connecticut, the site of ESPN's headquarters. But up to this point, they were bitter rivals.
He was on his jihad against ESPN. He wanted to take ESPN down.
This is Ric Bucher, one of the NBA's most accomplished journalists and has been in the game since 1998. He preceded Wojnarowski at ESPN, working there for over a decade as a senior reporter.
I admire the work that Woj did and what he built and what he made himself into. I mean, he made himself into a force. I don't like where the work took the business that I am in and where it left it. All that said, I think that he was after ESPN because of what he wanted to get, which was ultimately he wanted ESPN's platform. It's like Pepsi going after Coca-Cola. Like, you got to villainize the top dog in order to take them down. But the second you can join them and you have all the resources that the top dog has, or that you can be the top dog, well, of course you're going to take that.
When Woj joined ESPN in 2017, there were over 100 employees laid off, and at least 6 that mainly covered the NBA. One was Woj's natural rival at ESPN, newsbreaker Mark Stein, and another was Ethan Strauss, the same guy who criticized the decision piece back in the day. Apparently, multiple people at ESPN thought that Woj had told ESPN to make space for him, aka getting rid of people he didn't like. Once at ESPN, he definitively became the face of NBA journalism, but that doesn't mean his biases went away. In fact, in some cases, they became more evident. There's a great Washington Post article written by Ben Strauss, who didn't respond to my DM on Twitter for an interview. Please follow me so I can get more motion, please. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you. In it, he pointed out that Woj, after announcing a player deal, became more likely to tag the agency that had gotten it done. Case in point, when Melo signed with the Lakers, the tweet was super viral, with over 100,000 likes. But under the post, he added that Melo was repped by CAA. A guy truthfully replied, "I didn't really need to know that." Another guy replied to that, saying, "Nobody did, but it was his source and agency, so he had to."
Hey, let me get a light right quick. Hold on.
Okay. Had to, though, is probably a little strong. Just like when KD decided to go to the Nets. Did we really need to know that Rich Kleiman told Woj and that we should go to the boardroom website to learn more? In fact, if you look at any signing that Woj had announced before he retired, all of the people had shifted from sources to Clutch CEO Rich Paul or George S. Langberg of GSL Sports Group. From the biggest to the smallest of agents. Why? A few years back, a leaked Woj document was found by Ethan Strauss, the guy who Woj maybe got fired back in the day. He had found this PowerPoint slide that presented Woj as the #1 most popular NBA media account. Apparently, he was sending this to NBA teams and agents, but we don't know the exact reason. But naturally, it doesn't take much to put 2 and 2 together. Agents benefit from the exposure that comes with the #1 NBA account, and Woj benefits from having the most sources in the NBA. Easy peasy, right? Here's Ric Bucher.
He basically made it transactional. He would say, I have X number million followers on social media. You know, I'm on ESPN and you need to provide me information or it's not going to go well for you on my platform. Like you're not going to be represented well. He used it as a tool, as a threat. I know there's plenty of people who would talk to me when I was in that role or I was at ESPN. They were talking to me because they knew I had a big platform, that I was on TV, that I was going to be talking about whatever trade they were trying to make happen or whatever their position was. But it was never overt in wielding that. Like I wasn't going out and saying, if you don't give me this information, I'm going to cut you. Or conversely, if you give me the information, then I will write or report in a certain way that's beneficial. That is what I've been told is what Woj, wielded in terms of to get his arms around why people were going to call him first, why people were going to provide him information.
According to the Washington Post article, people involved with ESPN's NBA coverage said reporters felt like they had to avoid stories that painted Woj's sources in a bad light. They said they had to be extremely careful with the pipeline of news. I was told by one of my sources that Woj's power was his friendship, reinforced by one of his cardinal rules. Talk to the source as much as humanly possible without asking for news. Before you know it, people not only trust you, they like you. This fondness was something Woj didn't want to lose at all costs. At all costs. When you take a look at how Wojnarowski handled the Damian Lillard trade saga, it starts making sense. After the Trailblazers selected Scoot Henderson instead of trading for PG, damn, that's kind of lose-lose, huh? Dame's agent requested a trade through Chris Haynes, one of Dame's Day One journalists, and Woj retaliated. See, Neil Olshey, the former Blazers GM, was one of Woj's Day Ones in the game, going back over 2 decades. When Olshey was fired in 2021, Woj was one of the only guys who stood up for him. In fact, Woj put out a piece talking about Olshey exiting the Blazers. He was fired, insinuating that Dame shouldn't be given the max because he would be too old. This statement was probably written because the power of friendship compelled him to. The power of friendship also compelled him to write an article that was essentially a mouthpiece for the new Trailblazers GM Joe Cronin after Dame's public trade demand. It should also be noted, by the way, that Woj's ESPN colleague Mike Schmitz was hired by Portland as an assistant GM in 2022. Another example of this friendship is the situation with Ime Udoka and a white woman. When it was found out what Udoka had done, the unthinkable crime of cheating on Nia along with a white woman, a co-worker no less. Woj made sure to not only leave things vague, just calling it an organizational violation, but also adding that Udoka had just led the Celtics to the finals. I should add here, by the way, that Udoka is also signed with CAA. Starting to notice a pattern here. Another peculiarity came at the expense of his very own colleague, Brian Windhorst. During the second Ben Simmons saga, Windhorst had reports coming in that Harden was going to be traded to the Sixers.
The way I described it to you on Get Up is that they are in the deal zone right now. I am leaning towards this probably happening. I don't want to guarantee it or anything, but I think we're headed in that direction.
That same day, on the exact same show, Woj said that there was no such deal going on. Not even a discussion.
Harden, Philadelphia trade? Nowhere.
Yeah, nowhere. You think that's not
nowhere. Trade deadline is tomorrow at 3. It can change. But the idea that they are going back and forth, that's been surmised by some, is I don't believe that to be accurate.
This is kind of weird. But of course, Woj had friends with the Nets, like GM Sean Marks, who, guess what, was also signed with CAA. They gonna get me, bro. I'm cooked. When the trade was announced the very next day, Woj had to do some backtracking.
Who's gonna do it? Oh, let me be quiet. Woj is rich.
Well, Brooklyn and Philadelphia really started to negotiate in earnest today.
Something that Ethan Strauss took some pleasure in criticizing him for. Damn, God, we kind of hate this dude, man. Damn, this is like the 3rd time. So it's things like this. Mistakes that look like blips in the Woj reporting machine that were actually necessary cogs to keep the thing running. It looks like he got beat for the Udoka case and that he just whiffed on the Simmons thing. But looking a bit deeper, it makes sense. That's what you gotta do to be on top. He's, of course, made enemies along the way and kind of didn't have a life. But he was the best at what he did. But did it really matter?
I remember reporting out the whole Gilbert Arenas situation in Washington over a few days at Disneyland. And I remember its phones, it was a BlackBerry, it didn't charge very long. And I just remember sitting there plugged in by the water fountain while the kids are on rides. Not the best, not dad of the year on that one.
Woj himself found it wasn't. When he attended the funeral for a former fantastic ESPN NFL reporter who had died to throat cancer, he found himself struck by the amount of ESPN colleagues who didn't show up. This was a guy, Chris Mortensen, who did excellent work for ESPN for over 30 years. Yet many company people just went on with their lives. Coupled with his recent cancer diagnosis and the lack of drive to do the job anymore, he decided it was time to turn down millions of dollars in the cutthroat industry that he himself spearheaded to be human again. One thing really struck me during the research I did for this video. It was about Adam Schefter in a piece written for the Washington Post. There was an NFL reporter who didn't want to do a TV appearance one Christmas Day, so ESPN gave it to Schefter. The article said that ESPN liked that Schefter didn't have boundaries. They were able to control his schedule at their whim and use him as a machine. The less human, the better. But as Woj realized, is that worth it? When these guys are gone, they broke news a minute faster than everyone else. What are they gonna have to show for it? After all, just a few days after Woj announced his surprise retirement, a surprise to everyone, even ESPN found a new guy. Shams Charania, the protege of Woj, the guy who can't go on dates, can't watch a movie, and has over 20 hours of screen time on his phone per day. Someone else with no boundaries to pay the big bucks. While sure, us as fans will always remember Woj, it's not like he was doing anything special. His own son said that his job sucked, but that doesn't matter to the next guy. It doesn't really matter to the fan. And does it really matter to ESPN? News is news, and it'll get out if you're living life on 3 hours of sleep between contracts and trades and agents, or if you're not. Woj broke the game, and got out, it seems, right before it broke him. Now, at a fresh 30 years of age, the new machine takes its place in the NBA media factory. Is this the future of sports journalism? To be the biggest glazer, the loudest mouth, the fastest tweeter? I sure hope not. And if you feel the same, go ahead and subscribe, man. I'm pretty good too, for real though. Thanks for watching.